get started. This is the Front Door Intranet and Microsoft 365 session. I'm Peter Malozzi. I'm a value consultant here at Staffbase. I've been working on projects like this one for the last 5 or 6 years. And Sebastian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm happy to. My name is Sebastian Hoff. I'm actually joining from Germany today, and I'm working for the strategic advisory team of Staffbase. So my role within Staffbase is I'm consulting our customers if they're doing new intranets, if they're introducing new comms platforms. And it's my pleasure to be here to share some of my experiences and what I'm seeing happening in the intranet market right now.
Beautiful. And I guess we'll start off with you.
Yes. So I thought, why aren't we starting with something which is facing ourselves every day? So, and from my point of view, it's a super exciting time for anyone currently who has to deal or will be dealing with intranets in the future. And I'm trying to explain this in 3 different factors. And the first one is that if we're looking in the market of intranets, we have a lot of different concepts nowadays on how to look at intranets and how to set them up. We see concepts on the market such as front door intranets, as Frank has told you. We have social intranets, we have portal solutions, and we even have mobile intranets, mostly called employee apps. And in addition to those concepts, we have a lot of different tools, a broad spectrum of technologies and providers, some of which bring their own concepts onto the table, and others also supporting several of these available concepts. And on top of that, the third existing factor is that there's now a wide range also of stakeholders who are interested and involved into the introduction of intranets. So the intranets aren't any longer an IT project, but an initiative within companies that affects the entire organization. And because we believe there is a lot going on here right now, and it's quite a challenge to find your way through this jungle, we have brought you a very crisp and solid agenda with 3 points, and we will kick it off with the top 3 trends that I'm currently seeing in the market influencing intranets. Peter will then have a deeper look on the front door intranet concept that Frank just teased in the keynote. And as most of companies are also using Microsoft 365, you may ask yourself the question, how does this fit to a Microsoft stack? How do I combine something like a lightweight front door intranet with my existing Microsoft Teams and SharePoint environment? And this is what we are going to have a look on as well. And if we're starting with the 3 trends that we are seeing, the first one that I brought is something that probably most of you are also feeling, especially if you have frontline workers. Those numbers are out of a study that we did a couple of years ago, where we asked intranet responsibles, do you want to reach your non-desk workers with your intranet? And you can see that nearly 60% said, yes, I want to reach them. But as we asked them, do you actually reach them? Only 7.4% said, yes, I can reach my non-desk workers. So we have a huge gap there. And most companies are trying to fix this by implementing an employee app, which is an additional channel then for their non-desk workers, where they consume communication, where they get the most important information. And this situation is occurring on the whole globe. So nearly 80% of employees worldwide are non-desk workers. So this is a huge gap. And I could have presented this slide already 4 years ago, and it would be valid and is still valid today. But the situation also during the last 3 years showed us that somehow we are all mobile workers now. If we're looking on the left-hand side, those figures are showing the global internet traffic for mobile devices, and you can see that mobile devices are consuming more than half of the internet traffic. And of course, this is also based on private usage of the internet. But if we're looking into the latest study that Forbes published a couple of days ago, then 45% of employees would consider changing a job for having still a hybrid role. And hybrid role, of course, doesn't mean that you're always working on your private mobile device or on your mobile device at all. But the ways of working has changed through the pandemic. We all are used now to also work in different times than we are usually doing in the office. And we are seeing a trend among our customers that also customers who don't have any non-desk workers at all are starting with a mobile solution based on communication and information to fill this gap also for people who are saying, I'm going to work in a kind of blended environment. I'm also wanting to know what is happening inside of my company when I'm in the evening on the couch, I'm having time to consume news. This is something that is valid for a lot of people, and we are seeing companies with completely office workers starting mobile intranets. And this actually is my first trend. So this goal that communications had over the last decades, that they want to create reach, that they want to reach people. This is still valid, and this is still one of the top trends. As we see, we still have this gap of not being able to reach all the employees inside of corporations. And the second one is kind of connected to that, because we have a lot of different channels. Frank also had this slide about multi-channel. Everybody's always talking about multi-channel. We need to be active on as many channels as possible. And I brought one very special example. This example is a LinkedIn post from Herbert Diess. Probably some of you have heard about him. That's the former CEO of the Volkswagen Group. And this LinkedIn post is his farewell post. And what is so special about this post is that you can't read it out of this post that this is a farewell message. And Herbert Diess was very, very active on LinkedIn. He was basically steering the whole communication inside of the Volkswagen Group via LinkedIn. As soon as he posted something, the internal and external communication has adapted everything that he posted and spread it across all other channels. And at this point in time, where it was clear he will leave the company, he had this kind of, I don't know, this kind of puzzled post where if you know that this is a farewell post, you can certainly see it. But if you are aware that he will leave the company, there's no chance that you can see that this is a goodbye post. And what happened then for Volkswagen was very dramatic, because this was the leading channel and the leading person. And he left the company. He took all the followers with him because they were following Herbert Diess and not Volkswagen. And from one day to another, the whole communication department had to rearrange their strategy. They had to come up with a plan. How are we now doing communication? Who is giving us the content? Who is giving us the tonality? And the new CEO at the first days didn't even have a LinkedIn account. So this was very dramatic for Volkswagen. And the main point behind this is, if we're talking to companies about channels, there are a lot of channels where communication is happening. So we have intranets, of course, we have employee apps, we still have something like posters, bulletin boards, we have manager cascades where you can spread information over. But if you're asking internal comms teams, which of those channels are you actually owning? Where do you control the whole channel? What is going in? How is the structure? Do you have analytics about those channels? Then the typical three answers, and you can let us know in the chat if this is different for you or if you agree, we are owning the employee magazine, the employee app, and the intranet if it's available. All the other things are channels where somebody else has control over it. LinkedIn, for example, is something where you can't control what is going to happen there. There are a lot of other content contributors. You don't have access to the analytics. You can't control what's happening with LinkedIn. They have their own algorithm, how they are distributing content. You are just a stakeholder for LinkedIn. And this means we have to make sure that we understand what is a channel for us, an actual channel where we have the whole control over it. We are controlling how the structure is like, what is going in terms of content, what is not going in terms of content. And on the other hand side, we have something that we are calling touch points. Touch points are also channels, but you don't own them, but you can use them for communication if it makes sense. For example, Teams, Microsoft Teams would be, in our point of view, a touch point, because there is a lot going on in Teams and you can't control what exactly is going on. You can use Teams if it makes sense also for communication to reach people, but you will never have the full control over this channel. If you want to make sure that your CEO message gets the right reach, that it's always visible, maybe Teams isn't the right channel for that. It's just a touch point where you can increase the reach. And this leads me to trend number 2, that we need to understand the value of channels and that we need to identify what kind of touch points do we want to use in addition to them. And if we're looking into trend number 3, to get a bit ahead of time to get back to the planned agenda, this is also something Frank brought this picture of the Pope wearing this puffed coat. And I brought something else, and yeah, I do think a lot of people can't hear it anymore because it went so often viral on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook that AI is now the hottest shit. But this is really a game changer, especially for communicators. So if you're only looking at those 2 pictures, the left one, you can go to Stable Diffusion, you can go to Dolly, you can type in, give me a toddler jumping out of a plane with a parachute, and you will get this picture in seconds. In the last couple of years, this would need a very skilled Photoshop artist to create such a kind of image in hours and hours of work. And the right image, those are actually 4 people merged into one picture. And you can use the chat now to guess who is in this picture, what kind of 4 persons are merged there. Let's see if you get them all. And this picture wouldn't have been possible at all, maybe. You need a very, very skilled artist who is able to do such an exercise. And this is tremendously, because also this image is created in seconds. But this is not only working for images. Probably most of you have also heard about OpenAI and ChatGPT. And I just have written in one statement saying, write an article about the expert session that Peter and I are just doing at the Intranet bootcamp. And it gave me so much text. It even was too much to get it on this slide. And I personally, I don't like writing, but I have to do it from time to time. And ChatGPT is making it so much easier for me, because it gives me a draft which is already quite good and that I just can tweak until it's perfect. It's making my life more efficient, more easy, and takes this pain away of sitting in front of a white paper and starting writing things down. But this has an impact on internal communications and at the end of the day also on intranets. Because there will be a lot more people being able to create content. And at the end of the day, it will be also more content that will be created. And this is kind of scary in my point of view, because at the point in time where I'm talking to companies, they already are struggling to manage their editorial network, to manage to get the right quality out of their editors who are not communicators in many cases. But in the future, there will be more people who have something to say, being able to create actual content in form of text, in form of pictures, and maybe also in the form of videos in the future, which are AI generated. And that means that internal comms must stand out from the crowd to get this reach that they need. You have the most important topics and you need to be the central communication point that everybody trusts. The second point is that there is a lot of noise going on in terms of collaboration. So you all know that Microsoft Teams is usually overloaded with messages and with information. And if we are now increasing also the amount of news and actual content that is created, the noise will get louder. And that means we need to kind of separate collaboration from communication and information. And the third one is, as the content is getting more and more, we need to find ways to make sure that people are not faced with information overload. We need to think about things like personalization, so that we can create as much relevance as possible through things like passive personalization, so that user only gets those information who are mostly relevant for him without the need to do anything. And then they can maybe tweak this with active personalization to saying, I'm interested in also other topics which are outside of, for example, my location or outside of my country. I can subscribe to several other topics. And this, for me, is trend number 3. So we need to reduce noise, and we need to create this relevance. And if we are looking on those 3 trends, there are 3 learnings for me which are kind of the foundation for this front door intranet concept. The first one is that we can no longer see an intranet and an employee app as 2 different platforms. At the end of the day, if we're talking about intranets, this is the most trusted resource for your employees in terms of communication. And the intranet needs to work both on desktop devices as well as on mobile devices. And there is no difference any longer. So employee app and intranet need to go hand in hand and can no longer be separated. Learning number 2 for me is you need to identify and utilize your channels. So you need to be clear about what are your channels and what are you using as just as touch points in parallel. And learning number 3, internal comms needs this kind of safe harbor and needs to stand out with their communication to make sure that they're not going under in this noise that is generated from other stakeholders. And with those 3 learnings, maybe, Peter, I have set the perfect foundation for your explanation of what the actual front door intranet is.
Yeah, that's great, Sebastian, but maybe the people want to know, if you didn't cover it already, who were the people in the picture?
I see in the chat that there's Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates. So one is missing. Maybe we are giving those folks a couple of minutes more to think about who could that be.
I love it. Leaving it a mystery. So we'll circle back and fill in the 4th, and you can guess in the meantime. But let's talk a little bit about this concept of front door intranets and go a little deeper on this. So one of the most important things, if you're talking to anyone about an intranet, is to understand and decide and agree what an intranet is. So let's run through 3 component elements that are important parts of any intranet. The first is, we'll call it a shop window. And what we mean is, like the metaphor of a shop window, this is the place that you look in and that you see first. It is the way in. It's the entry point. It's relevant for everyone. This is where communications is happening. Company news that's going on, company-wide social walls, the most important information that needs to be widely distributed, like HR, benefits, compliance, policies, that kind of information, lives in the shop window where it can most easily be seen. A second component of the intranet, if we put it like that, we would call a library. And this, like the physical library that maybe it's been a while since you've been actually in one, it contains a lot of heavier materials. So we're talking about big, chunky stuff like knowledge databases, wikis. There could be thousands of documents, thousands of pages in some companies that live in what we would describe metaphorically as a library. And for a third component, let's talk about teamwork. So here we mean collaboration, peer-to-peer, like we see in the photo. It's a group of people coming together to actually do some work on something, not just grabbing a reference from the library or peering in the shop window and reading the latest news, but actually moving a project forward somehow. Then let's consider that as a third separate area of teamwork. So peer-to-peer, chatting, working on documents together. And so, the big intranet portal and what some players tried to do in the past is to actually do all three of these different areas really well, even though they have different sets of requirements and different challenges and different features and technologies that might support them. Nevertheless, there was, and in some ways still is, some benefit to having things in one place. But as we'll discuss, there are some trade-offs. So this would be what we call the big intranet portal that attempts to cover all of these areas in one. So the question, I'll put it to you in the audience, which do you think is the better strategy now in 2023? To go with one single platform, or alternatively, to go with the best of breed approach? I
Shop
love it.
window.
From Claire, the shop window. Yes.
Sounds like best of breed.
Yeah, that reads like a best of breed answer to me.
Any other opinions from the audience?
Okay, folks don't want to weigh in. Oh, Elena agrees, best of breed. Yep. And that would be our take as well. We think times have changed, and we're not seeing those big intranets so often anymore. So when we talk about how things have evolved in the space, there are really good tools that have emerged now for teamwork, for example, like MS Teams, famous for being the fastest growing software product, I think, for Microsoft, but maybe of any software product of all time in the last few years, maybe before ChatGPT, I don't know. Slack, software like Teams and Slack wasn't around a decade ago, but we have seen that there just are these even more effective ways of collaborating and getting that work around the table done than there used to be. And you can build a huge product with very deep and rich features to meet those needs around teamwork. And then similarly, we also see these tools like Confluence or SharePoint that are intended to be a library and that perform that task really well. And then we have this third area, right? The shop window. And we see this trend of using those tools that you see like libraries and teamwork. They often get kind of ported over, and we try to use them as the shop window. A great example, the classic one to me, is SharePoint. It's in the name, right? SharePoint, the point where files are shared. That is how SharePoint began its life. But eventually, as SharePoint grew, they added this ability for SharePoint pages. And of course, since we had this need for this component that you see of a shop window, and since SharePoint was often bundled in with the other Microsoft products that companies had already purchased, so zero additional cost, it's easy to see why folks went to adding those SharePoint pages to also cover that shop window use case. And of course, the challenge there is that much like with Microsoft Teams, with SharePoint itself and Confluence, there's actually quite a deep and rich set of needs that emerge on the shop window side. It means having a lightweight central entry point on all devices for all employees, for example. And that means being very masterful about employee mobile apps and being able to brand these, being able to distribute them in the best possible way. There's a lot to learn in that space that's really different from what you need for a library. And Gartner sees this the same way. They talk about it being necessary to have this primary entry point. So we really are seeing that this is where things are headed. We don't think Teams is going anywhere. We don't think these special needs and requirements are going anywhere. And certainly it doesn't get any easier for one thing to magically be able to cover the others as we learn about how much better all these areas can get. But the fact that they're separate tools does not mean that they can't integrate with one another and talk to one another in a really great way and generate a ideal user experience. And the prime example of that we're going to talk about is this combination of a front door intranet for the shop window side of things with Microsoft 365, which covers the library and the teamwork aspects so well. So this is why we style them as a dream duo, and we talk about a few scenarios that are possible. So one scenario is you could have Microsoft only, and you've got everyone at your company is licensed on Microsoft, and you're using SharePoint and Teams and Viva to cover all of your bases. In the second scenario, you could have an existing SharePoint intranet in place. And let's assume for the moment that it's widely used and it's not outdated. And really, it's just like a mobile version or a mobile entry point that's missing. And so for this second scenario, you could actually add that in, bring in a mobile app that focuses on communication and all the things from the shop window area, and then extend what you've already got with that highly functional SharePoint-oriented intranet. And then there's a third scenario where you actually go and you build a complete front door intranet, which lives beside the Microsoft world. And having this shop window also has benefits, not just in terms of it being the shop window side, so you have great entry points for everyone. That also benefits people who are used to using a desktop, for example, but it's really handy that I also carry a phone in my pocket, like Sebastian talked about in the trends. We really want to be wherever the user is at any given moment where that could be convenient for them. So that would be a third case where you have this shop window that you have focused on beside Microsoft, and then you've got Microsoft tools like Teams for your collaboration, and you've got SharePoint covering really well that library repository case. So the question, looking at these scenarios is which is the right one that fits for me? And we think there are a few parameters to think about if you're trying to judge which approach is best. So questions like, am I a global company that needs a simple and intuitive solution? How complex is my organizational structure? And does everyone within that structure have a Microsoft license, for example? How different are my employee personas within that structure? Do I have only folks who are working remotely or as we might call office workers? Or do I have folks who are frontline, field, factory employees? Do I have a mix? And how much control do I want to have as internal communications over the intranet? Do I want to be sure, for example, that CEO and crisis communications are always very prominently visible? And do I want to have that clear separation between the collaboration and the communication and information? And so we think if you've got even just a couple of those things that I mentioned going on, we would recommend this order that we've got on screen for those scenarios. Basically that front door case, the best of breed, like we talked about, being the recommendation, particularly if you've got any heterogeneity, different types of workers that you're trying to reach, things like this. And then in the most simple case where maybe everyone at your company is an office worker and they're all on Microsoft and you don't face issues with needing to separate collaboration from shop window information, maybe that would be like the other pole where you would land on number 3. Okay, so just want to, in case you're not aware of what these kind of integration points are, just want to mention a few of them because we do see that it's essential that you have those connections when you take that best of breed approach. So, for example, bringing SharePoint content into your front door intranet, that would be really important. If we think about that, like there's the shop window, and if I want to find a book in the library, I don't want to have to walk into the shop and, walk 3 football fields and navigate something really complex in order to pull out that book. It would be ideal if I'm here at the shop window, I search for that book and I'm able to just grab it almost right through the front door. And that's what an integration and linking can do, is give your user that kind of front shop window access combined with the ease of getting to the library when it's time for that. And then similarly, search, I mentioned that user, looking for the book that can be done during search. And you can also, like in the prior integration, surface file directories, things like that directly in a relevant area. So if you're on an HR page, you could show the HR policy documents that are stored in the library right in that context-specific area for someone to access. Okay, and then finally, the collaboration area. So someone's working on projects, things like this, you can make it really convenient for them, even though they're sitting at that table and that's their area of focus, that they can easily glance at the shop window content from there. So those would be 3, from our point of view, essential parts of creating that successful symbiosis, the wonderful pairing of the front door intranet together with Microsoft 365. Okay, and
I have
I'm
to
going to turn
unmute
over.
myself. That would help.
Yeah, I'll turn over to Sebastian to talk us through some real life examples.
Yes. So for the sake of time, I will keep this rather short and sweet. I just brought some examples that you can see that this applies to companies of all size and in all shapes. So I brought one example of a Fortune 500 company, which is the Heraeus Group, which has 15 to 16,000 employees. What they did is exactly this front door intranet approach, that they said, okay, we are giving access to the front door intranet on desktop and mobile to all employees, and we are providing all the office workers access to the whole Microsoft suite in terms of collaboration. Those are integrated into each other and are working on all devices. Same applies, and I just brought one smaller example from a German financial institute, which has 800 employees, so a rather small company. They only have office workers. They anyhow decided still for front door intranet to have this lightweight entry point, and then they have a collaboration suite in parallel to that. But I also brought you a very huge example from DPDHL, and Frank already had a slide on DHL with Smart Connect, and I find this overview very, very powerful. This is typically, if I'm bringing this to conferences, the point in time where everybody takes their smartphone out and takes a photo, because you can take so much out of this single graphic. And you can see in the middle of everything, there is Microsoft Teams and Smart Connect. Smart Connect at the end of the day is the front door intranet for DPDHL. And on the left-hand side, you have all the systems which are intended for the office colleagues. On the right-hand side, you have all the systems and contents for all colleagues. So you can see that there is things like employee benefits, travel expenses, idea management, social walls, company news, all the way on the right-hand side, intended for all colleagues, accessible by the front door intranet, and the collaboration world with Yammer, SharePoint, with things like OneDrive and Mural is on the left-hand side only for the Office colleagues, and you can reach this also via the front door intranet. And with that, we already have seen the Clearbox report from Frank, so he already mentioned that. Again, this would be our reading recommendation for you, even though it's more than 700 pages, so it's kind of heavy, but very worthwhile to read through. And with that, thank you, Peter, for your explanation of the concept, and we are looking forward to seeing you again in the next sessions which are upcoming.